Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz, speaking to you from the pulpit of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia. I'll be speaking with you about, among other issues, the imperative of wearing a mask. And yet you don't see me wearing a mask right now, so I should explain. We have a protective lucite barrier, which you may or may not be able to see on camera. When I'm not behind that barrier, I do mask up. I'd like to speak to you on the subject of necessary and unnecessary losses. In one of those always illuminating coincidences, we are reaching the end of the secular year 2020, good riddance. And at just the same time, we are concluding our annual rereading of the book of Genesis. See you again in October. Endings are the order of the day. In fairy tales, endings are all about they lived happily ever after. But endings in real life involve loss. Indeed, this year has been filled with loss. We've lost, here in America, 1/3 people to COVID-19. That's a staggering number. Those who attempt to challenge these numbers are simply trying to subordinate the truth to political convenience. I'm asserting from the pulpit of this synagogue that red or blue, you cannot find favor in God's sight unless you proceed from truthfulness. This loss, putting us in the sad position of being the absolute worst of the advanced nations of the world in fighting this pandemic, needs to rouse us from our partisan platitudes. This year we've had another kind of a loss too. We've also lost much of the tattered sense of national unity that we had still preserved despite the growing partisanship of 2 generations and the added turmoil of recent years. In the past, we quarreled and contended, and then after election night, or shortly thereafter, the loser conceded the race, and the nation prepared for its next round of political life. This is true both for Republicans and for Democrats. Richard Nixon conceded his election loss in 1960, and Al Gore conceded his loss in 2000. Although there was much better evidence in each of those episodes than is the case in 2020 that the results of the election had been tainted. The failure of this time-honored tradition in this year of disasters has poisoned the waters of our political life anew, adding still more of an obstacle to our country's ability to move forward. These 2 losses linked together this year are actually leading examples of 2 very different kinds of losses: unnecessary losses and necessary losses. Unnecessary losses need to be a specter so commanding that they motivate us to break out of the unproductive patterns that cripple our national will. But we have failed as a nation to do that. Necessary losses, on the other hand, need to be accepted with grace and analyzed with calm wisdom for lessons to help us in the future. We have failed there as well. unnecessary losses first. We did not need to politicize the common sense practice of wearing protective masks and avoiding careless congregating. Other democracies are governed by conservative leaders who nonetheless heed the critical advice of doctors and scientists. Boris Johnson wears his mask. Bibi Netanyahu wears his mask. It is a particularly American folly to equate scorn for mask wearing with conservative political philosophy. This anti-intellectual attitude has been an annoyance in American society for a century and 3/4, since the Know Nothing Party, that's what it was called, Know Nothing, since that party roiled American politics in the 1850s. But now, this scorn for science has proven fatal. So many of the 1/3 of a million would not have died had we been serious about our protective measures from the start, and had we not repeatedly pandered to the worse angels of our nature. We need to ponder the necessary losses too. The 1968 Gene Raskin song, "Those Were the Days, My Friend, We Thought They'd Never End," sung by Mary Hopkin, correctly identifies the source of the delusion that one will never lose. It is immaturity. As the song goes, we'd lead the life we choose, we'd fight and never lose, for we were young and sure to have our way. In the second stanza of the song, the lyrics continued. The members of the singer's circle matured and lost their starry notions. But today, nearly half of Americans are fixated on the thought that there is only human worth in constant, uninterrupted victory, and that defeat is inexplicable apart from some deceit. It's time to wake up, America. Life doesn't work that way. To deny that I'm going to lose may be just barely excusable when one is legitimately immature. It is not excusable adult behavior. Religiously, this is all so clear. God makes us mortal. That is one of the early lessons of Genesis. God says, "My spirit will not lodge forever in the human." To be human is to live and then to die. That is the ultimate loss. There's no avoiding it. Other losses are less stark, but no less inevitable. As the book of Ecclesiastes says, "Dor holech udor va." A generation goes and another generation comes. The prayer of Moses, man of God, Psalm 90, speaks of the days of sorrow that are our lot. The psalm does not pretend that we can avoid them. It prays simply that God will see fit to match days of joy to those days of sorrow that are part of life. In this week's Torah portion, the last chapters of the book of Genesis, both Jacob and Joseph confront the imminent reality of death. And they do so with dignity. They accept reality, and they help their survivors to continue to live purpose-driven lives by giving them clear guidelines for proper behavior. Father Jacob instructs his survivors how to bury him. Joseph instructs his survivors how to face the future, including the likelihood that the immediate future will be worse before the long-term future becomes better. Good advice for us today. In fact, the task of religion is to teach us how to live nobly and ethically in spite of the necessary losses that frame our existence. As we close the book on the year 2020, here is my prayer for 2021, that we as Americans learn how to live in such way as to minimize our unnecessary losses, and that we also learn how to accept our necessary losses with maturity so that we can prepare for better days ahead. Amen.